Welcome to everyone joining us today for Sedgwick Brand Protection's latest European Product Safety and Recall Index webinar, where today we'll be focusing on the key developments from the third quarter of 2025. Of course, we realise you couldn't possibly enjoy your Christmas holidays without first getting a sneak preview of the latest recall data and taking a closer look at some of the recent regulatory trends shaping the market. So before we do switch you over to your festive mode, we have a packed session for the next 45 minutes or so, with plenty of insights helping you to stay ahead of what is a constantly evolving marketplace. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Ockleshaw, a product recall consultant at Sedgwick in our brand protection division. My role focuses working closely with clients in the very early stages of potential product recalls, helping them define the scope and strategy before engaging our operations team to support with the execution. And I'm delighted to have two of my colleagues from that team joining me today. So Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Absolutely. Hi all, I'm Hannah, Director of Client Services and Operations here at Sedgwick. I oversee delivery and execution of all recall events internationally across all of our operational functions. Great to be speaking with you all today. Also joining us for today's webinar is my colleague Rachel. Rachel, over to you.
Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Rachel Quinn and I am a Senior Account Manager here at Sedgwick. So my role mainly involves overseeing and supporting with the initial launch stage of new recall campaigns and also just being a dedicated point of contact for our clients as they navigate their recalls.
Thanks very much. So today's webinar is focused on the UK and European Union. We're going to look at 5 product categories, which are in the order of automotive, food and beverage, pharmaceutical, medical device, and then consumer products. And then we break the consumer products category into 3 regulatory areas, which are AI and technology, markets and trade, and then sustainability. The report is based on data we collect from safety regulators and government agencies across the EU and the UK. Our colleagues across the pond also ran our US index webinar yesterday. We've already published that report. So if you missed it or you're interested in product safety and recall activity specifically in the US, then there's a link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code that's on your screen now to gain access there. I also wanted to quickly call out that the index is greatly supported by contributions from partners at some of the top consultancy and law firms, who very kindly provide their commentary on what certain regulatory changes might mean for manufacturers and how they should prepare, or more general practical insights into how the authorities might look to deal with new and upcoming technologies and innovations. So as you can see on the screen there, we really appreciate the time and expertise from Gleiss Lutz, Simmons & Simmons, Taylor Wessing, Ashurst and Cooley law firms. So please do make sure to read their full contributions when we send the European Index report to you after today's session. These are real expert opinions from the industry, and I've got no doubt that they'll be really beneficial in your day-to-day roles. Okay, so let me turn things over now to you, Hannah, for an overview of the Q3 2025 recall data.
Thanks, Chris. In the third quarter of 2025, there were 3,745 product recalls in the EU and UK across all categories and subcategories that we track. This is 1.6% fewer than the 3,804 recalls that we saw in Q2. Of the 5 categories and 3 subcategories that we monitor, recalls increased quarter over quarter in 4 of them. Those 4 are automotive, food and beverage, toys, and consumer electronics. The automotive sector recorded its highest quarterly total in more than a decade, and the toy sector experienced its second highest level in this same time frame. The pharmaceutical, medical device, consumer product, and clothing industries all had fewer recalls compared to last quarter. The clothing industry had the biggest drop across industries, falling by 39.3%, and the number of total consumer products recalls dropped by 16.8%. In the first 3 quarters of the year, there were 11,474 recalls across all categories that we track, which is 8.4% higher than the last year's total of 10,581 events during the same period. Continuing at this rate, 2025 is set to record the highest level of European recall activity in over a decade. Rachel, what's going on with market forces and regulatory changes in this quarter?
Looking at regulatory changes in the third quarter, both the UK and EU announced measures to make their respective jurisdictions a hub for life sciences innovation and research. So the two regimes are also working to advance their own updates to medical device regulations. In addition, there were parallels between the two governments in terms of trying to ease the transition to zero emission vehicles. The UK offered financial incentives for certain electrical vehicle models, while the EU is in talks with industry stakeholders about easing some regulations. Making online shopping safer for consumers was another shared goal. The UK's new Product Regulation and Metrology Act includes obligations for e-commerce platforms. The EU is also increasing customs oversight of imported products, including those that are sold online. Several sustainability measures moved forward, including the EU's Waste Framework Directive. So this rule will initially impact the food and clothing sectors the most. However, enforcement of the EU's batteries regulation has been postponed by 2 years to give the companies more time to prepare. Now, Chris, do we want to take a closer look at each industry?
Yes, so we'll take a break at the end of each industry section to answer any questions that you have. Feel free to pose those questions using the chat box feature throughout the webinar. And then if there's time, we'll also come back and try and answer a few of them at the end. To kick off each sector, we will ask a poll question to test your knowledge. So you'll see a poll pop up on the right-hand side of your screen where you can record your answers. And don't worry, they are all anonymous. So let's start with the automotive sector and our first poll question of the day. So in July, the UK government launched an electric car grant to support the transition to zero emission vehicles and incentivise sustainable automotive manufacturing. The current mandate suggests 100% of new cars and vans sold in Great Britain must be zero emission by 2035. But according to the automotive industry sources, what percentage of cars on UK roads were fully electric at the end of September 2025? And your options are A, approximately 4.9%, B, approximately 8.7%, or C, approximately 2.3%. I'll give you all a chance to cast your votes there. I must admit, when I saw the question, actually, I was quite surprised at how low the answers are there. I feel like I see a lot more electric cars on the road day to day in the UK. I was kind of expecting, the number to be at least in double figures, but we will come back to the answer to the question in just a moment. So some general updates from the automotive industry in Q3. For another quarter, tariffs were a top concern. In August, the EU and US reached a trade deal that sets US tariffs on vehicles and vehicle parts imported from the EU at 15%. EU tariffs on US imports are set at 0. And this agreement comes after one European automaker posted a $1 billion loss in July, citing the US tariffs as a factor. And this manufacturer is one of many to express economic challenges linked with the new fees. Both the UK and EU are working to meet their aggressive zero emission goals by 2035. The European Commission is in strategic talks with automakers as they are asking the government to ease some of the restrictions around emissions. Several industry stakeholders have said that the goal to ban the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035 is unobtainable. And meanwhile, the UK is advancing several projects around automated vehicles. Regulators are working to set regulations for automated passenger services, and they're also gathering input on safety principles and marketing guidelines for automated vehicles. So let's have a look now at some of the data.
And first, we will give you the answer to the poll question. So according to the automotive industry sources, what percentage of cars on UK roads were fully electric by the end of September 2025? And the answer here was 4.9%. So the government's new programme provides grants of up to £3,750 towards the purchase of a new electric vehicle. However, there are some concerns that this initiative's eligibility criteria is excluding too many vehicles and could unfairly impact the market. So let's just take a quick look at who got that one right. So we had 18% went with 8.7, the higher figure, 24% if you went with 2.3, and the majority at 58% got that one right at 4.9%. So well done, and we'll pass you over to Hannah now to go through the data.
Thanks, Rachel. Now, let's have a look at the Q3 data. The number of recalls across the EU and UK automotive sector more than doubled between Q2 and Q3 this year. The total number of recall events rose from 145 in Q2 to 197 in Q3 of this year. That is the highest quarterly total in more than a decade. Between the 1st of January this year through to the 30th of September, there have been 690 recalls across the automotive sector, which is a 45.9% increase from the first 3 quarters of 2024, which had 473 events. It's actually already more than the full year total for 2024, which was 669 recalls. Injury-related hazards were the predominant cause of automotive recalls. There were 222 events attributed solely to this risk in Q3. This is a significant increase from the 112 last quarter. Fire ranked as second most reported cause, which accounted for 51 recalls, which was up from 28 in the previous quarter. And chemical risks were third with 9 events in Q3. Just as a reminder to you all, we share a lot more data about each industry in the full Product Safety and Recall Index report. Let's pause for a moment while we take any questions for the automotive industry.
Yeah, I can't see any immediate questions so far, but I'll give you just a moment to put any there that you do have in the chat. We do often get some questions that are sent in throughout the year as well. So if you do have any general questions for us, feel free to send them in, throughout the year, and we'll try and answer them on some of these webinars too. One question that we had recently, actually, that I thought I'd share was, how should automakers prepare for the UK's proposed safety standards for automated vehicles? So we had a little look into this. The proposed statement of safety principles for automated vehicles looks at safety expectations for self-driving cars across 3 different stages, which are pre-deployment, post-deployment, and then annual assessments. So it's likely that the post-deployment and the annual assessment stages will have the biggest impact on recalls, since those are the ones that will actually evaluate real-world performance of the vehicles. And automakers should be sure to have robust monitoring systems in place and comply with any reporting obligations.
If there's no more questions, we will move on to the food and beverage sector. And again, starting off with a poll question. So in July, the UK's National Health Service, or NHS, released its 10-year health plan. One of the core principles of the plan is empowering people to make healthy lifestyle choices, including the food they eat. So which of these is not one of the proposed changes? So we have A, restricting junk food advertising targeted at children. B, banning the sale of high caffeine energy drinks to people under 16 years old. C, updating the nutrient profile for categorizing food as more or less healthy. Or D, removing artificial dyes from foods. So you can make your choice on the poll screen, and we will just pause for a moment while you enter your answer. And now I will hand you over to Hannah, who's going to talk about the trends in the food and beverage sector from the 3rd quarter.
Thank you. In September, amendments to the EU's Waste Framework Directive were approved. The rule gives food processors, manufacturers, retailers, restaurants, food service providers and households until the 31st of December 2030 to meet binding food waste reduction targets. Member states will need to establish processes to facilitate the donation of unsold food that is safe for human consumption. The UK announced 2 big initiatives in July that will also affect the food and beverage industry. Stakeholders should anticipate a range of new reporting requirements and updates to labelling and advertising rules. In addition to the NHS plan Rachel just mentioned, the UK government also announced the Towards a Good Food Cycle strategy. This programme promotes healthy and affordable options for consumers as well as growth for that sector. UK regulators are also specifically looking at food for children younger than 3 years old. They are calling on manufacturers to reduce salt and sugar in commercial baby food. And in addition, they want updated labelling to align with current nutritional standards. And I'm sure some of you that are based in the UK would have heard that on news in previous months. The EU has introduced stricter controls for detecting and preventing listeria in ready-to-eat foods. Accountability and liability for this are spread across the entire product life cycle beyond just at the production level.
Thanks, Hannah. So let's revisit the poll question that Rachel just asked. So which is not one of the proposed changes in the NHS's 10-year health plan? So the answer was in fact D, removing artificial dyes from foods. And I can see that 30% of you got that one correct. 36% of you actually went for C. That was the highest popular answer, updating the nutrient profile for categorizing food as more or less healthy. And then the lowest options were, or lowest chosen answers were A and B. So looking at some of the data then, in Q3, regulators across the EU and UK reported a total of 1,352 food and beverage product recalls, which is a 6% increase from the 1,276 that were recorded in Q2. In the first 3 quarters of 2025, there have been a total of 3,870 recalls, 2.6% fewer than the 3,974 that were recorded in the same period in 2024. Non-bacterial contamination, which includes aflatoxins and pesticides, remain the leading cause of food and beverage recalls, accounting for 526 events. Bacterial contamination, including Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli, ranked as the second most common cause of recall activity, cited in 280 events. And then excessive substance levels were the third most prevalent reason for recalls. They contributed to 95 events. Among product categories, fruit and vegetables experienced the highest number of recalls with 241 events, with nuts, nut products and seeds followed with 170. Dietetic foods, food supplements, and fortified foods were the third highest category with 97 incidents reported. So we'll just pause again there at the end of that industry section just to see if there's any immediate questions there on the food and beverage industry.
I can take this one on. So what changes should stakeholders be making in light of these tighter limits for the listeria? So as Hannah mentioned, these new rules are expanding the accountability quite considerably. So previously, the listeria levels were only monitored at the production site, but now for any ready-to-eat foods, these levels are actually going to be monitored throughout their entire shelf life. So that's including from production site to its time on the shelf. So in addition to the producers being responsible for testing, that's going to expand to logistics, storage companies, the retailers, the distributors. So anyone who has a food business operation will have to implement quite strong monitoring programs and be ready to take quite quick corrective action when necessary. So from our perspective, we think at least initially, we're going to see quite a rise in listeria recalls while companies sort of get their heads around these new systems implemented. can't see any others, but if there's any other questions, we can loop back after the next section. But we will move on to medical devices, and again, testing your knowledge with a question. So in September, the European Commission called for a call to evidence seeking feedback on proposed amendments to the Medical Devices Regulation and In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Devices Regulation. So among the more than 400 submissions received, there was an open letter from MedTech Europe and 35 trade associations from across the member states outlining their priorities for changes to the medical device regulations. So what was not one of the 3 short-term relief measures that they asked the Commission to implement by the end of 2025 or start of 2026? So options are A, an implementing act that harmonises rules for notified bodies; B, postponing certain recertification requirements currently in the regulations for devices which are already certified; or C, closer alignment with UK rules. Again, we'll just give you a moment to make your selection. And then Hannah, would you like to give us some insights on the medical device trends from Q3?
I would be happy to. In July this year, the Chinese government announced it would exclude EU-based companies from procurement contracts of more than 5.43 million euros for certain medical devices. These restrictions took effect on the 6th of July this year. The action was in response to the European Union voting in June to exclude Chinese companies from EU government purchases on medical devices exceeding 5 million euros. This is just one of the financial pressures facing the European medical device industry currently. The trade challenges come against a backdrop of widespread rule changes. Both the EU and UK advanced changes to their regulatory frameworks for medical devices. And in our previous question, we did mention the European Commission's call for evidence. The UK's MHRA has proposed changes to international reliance schemes, UKCA marking, and risk classifications for medical devices. Some of these changes would simplify compliance for manufacturers. However, reclassifying devices will take some time to implement. To help get innovative products to market more quickly, the UK intends to launch an early access service. The programme targets devices that address unmet clinical needs, and it would allow controlled real-world testing of devices prior to full authorization. Chris, do you want to give us the answer to our question and share medical device data?
Yes, so the question, just as a reminder, what was not one of the 3 short-term relief measures MedTech Europe asked the Commission to implement by the end of 2025 or early 2026 regarding updates to medical device regulations? The answer was in fact C, closer alignment with UK rules. So the other request was to expedite pilot programs for new regulatory pathways targeting breakthrough innovations and orphan and pediatric devices. As a long-term measure, they asked for the Commission to establish centralised oversight for notified bodies across all member states. And looking at, actually, I'm kind of surprised there because that was a particularly tricky question, I thought, even by our standards, but 46% of you answered that one correctly, going for C. B was the second most popular. Okay, so looking at some of the data then, regulators across the UK and EU recorded 860 medical device recalls in Q3, which is a 6% decrease from the 914 events that we reported in Q2. Looking at recall activity for the first 3 quarters of 2025, there have been 2,589 medical device recalls. That's 7% fewer than the 2,786 events during the same period in 2024. Device failure was the leading cause of medical device recalls across Europe, cited in 188 events. Manufacturing defects were the second most frequent cause of medical device recalls, linked to 143, and software issues followed in third place with 136. So we'll just pause again there just to see if there's any specific questions on the medical device industry. So a question here, what does the MHRA's position on international reliance mean for medical device manufacturers? So I think the fact that the MHRA views the regulatory systems for medical devices in Australia, Canada, the EU and the US as comparable to Great Britain's is probably good news for companies whose products already have approval in those jurisdictions. So while the exact process will vary based on the type of device, in general, marketing approval will be much faster and much more efficient. Unfortunately, though, the EU approved devices, the new pathways for those products won't be available until a pending CE mark consultation has been completed.
Now, let's take a look at the pharmaceutical sector. And again, starting with our question. In July, the European Commission fined a major active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer and its subsidiary for breaching EU antitrust rules. The Commission determined that for more than 12 years, the company participated in a cartel concerning an important pharmaceutical ingredient. What was the amount of the fine? Was it A, €49,800, B, €489,000, or C, 893,275 euros. That one's a tongue twister. So again, if you'd like to make your selection on the poll screen. And we will reveal the answer to that question after we discuss Q3 regulatory changes for the pharmaceutical sector. So both the EU and UK announced comprehensive plans in July to transform their respective life sciences sectors. Both jurisdictions want to be the leader in research and innovation. The EU strategy for European life sciences focuses on facilitating funding, strengthening its research infrastructure, and reducing fragmented legislation. In the UK, efforts to overhaul its clinical research delivery system are part of a broader life sciences sector plan. The campaign goals include making research more inclusive and improving timely access to health and care research. AI systems are being used more frequently in pharmaceutical manufacturing. The European Commission issued a consultation to put some guardrails around the role of that AI technology plays. So proposed changes to the Good Manufacturing Practice Guidelines would prohibit the use of certain types of AI models. So let's see how everyone did on the pharmaceutical question, and then we can look at the data.
Okay, so a reminder of the question. How much did the European Commission fine a major active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer and its subsidiary for breaching EU antitrust rules? The answer is B, a sizable €489,000. It is the Commission's first cartel case in the pharmaceutical sector involving an active pharmaceutical ingredient. And looking at your responses, 36% of you got that correct. I think the majority of you, so 61% actually went with C, the €893,275. Okay, so now to the numbers. Regulatory authorities across the UK and EU reported a total of 101 pharmaceutical recalls in Q3. This is a 2.9% decrease from the previous quarter. Year to date, there have been 298 recalls, which is 28.4% higher than the 233 events in the same period in 2024. The leading cause for pharmaceutical recalls this quarter was safety concerns, which accounted for 24 events. Mislabeling was the second most cited cause of recalls, which had 18 events. And the combination of foreign material and contamination was linked to 14 recalls in Q3. Now, let's pause and take any questions for the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, I can't see any immediate questions on the pharma industry there. I did notice there's a different chat box. You've got a chat box and then a Q&A box, and I noticed we missed a couple of questions in the Q&A, one specifically on autonomous vehicles, which we'll come back to at the end. Just going to answer one quick one here, actually, on the pharmaceutical sector. So for pharmaceutical manufacturers who are considering the use of AI, what should they take away from the European Commission's proposed changes to the Good Manufacturing Practice Guidelines? So that's a good question. There's several important considerations for manufacturers. So first, they should evaluate existing validation and data governance procedures to determine if changes need to be made to accommodate AI systems. And then they should also understand the associated documentation requirements for using AI. And then in addition, companies should review relationships with AI solution providers to fully understand the contractual terms, validation responsibilities, and their audit rights. As a drug maker, you are ultimately responsible for the ensuring that standards of integrity, of accuracy, traceability, that they're all upheld. So thank you for that question. Okay, I can see a few other questions coming in, but we'll move over just to the consumer products sector just to keep things moving, and we'll try and revisit those towards the end. We'll first discuss regulatory changes for Q3 across 3 cross-sector categories, which are AI and technology, sustainability, and then markets and trade. And then we'll highlight Q3 recall trends for the overall consumer product sector. So we encourage you to download the full report for analysis of the recall data that we've divided specifically into the categories of electronics, toys, and clothing. So we'll start with our last poll question of the day. In July, the UK Consumer Protection Organisation, which published research examining the use of vague and substantiated environmental claims by businesses. The group identified green claims in descriptions of 1,000 products and assessed those statements against the Competition and Markets Authority's Green Claims Code. So the question, what percentage of products advertised failed checks related to at least one of the Green Claim Code's 6 key principles? So your options here are A, 84%, B, 53%, or C, 95%.
Now you've hopefully made your choice. We will start to look at some of the regulatory highlights for Q3 related to AI and technology. In July, the European Commission published the General Purpose AI Code of Practice. So these guidelines address the legal requirements that providers of general purpose AI models must meet under the AI Act. The majority of the provisions in the EU's batteries regulations were delayed for 2 years to August 2027. So this postponement aligns with the EU's efforts to simplify the regulations and to boost competitiveness. The UK Law Commission released the list of new projects it will consider for legal reforms. Among them was a review of product liability laws for emerging technologies. So the Commission is looking to balance support for businesses that want to grow and innovate with protections for consumers.
Okay, so let's have a look at some of the priorities in Q3 around markets and trade. The UK's Product Regulation and Metrology Act became law in July. The next step is for regulators to advance secondary legislation to implement what could be sweeping changes to product safety regulations. Top priorities include rules for online marketplaces and micro-mobility devices. The European Parliament is also looking at consumer protections related to e-commerce. It adopted a resolution in July to update the Union Customs Code. Parliament also wants to institute broad reforms for online sellers and importers. And these proposed measures will primarily impact companies outside of the EU. However, there may also be a trickle down of ramifications for EU consumers and sellers. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority has made eliminating fake reviews a focus as it implements provisions of the Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Act. The agency's review of 100 websites found that a majority of companies were not in compliance with the rules of banning fake reviews. And the Competition and Markets Authority has boosted its outreach and educational efforts.
Thank you. So now for our final area of regulatory changes, which is sustainability. EU regulators approved the final version of its amended Waste Framework Directive in September. New extended producer responsibility schemes for textile companies and suppliers are expected to be established by Q1 of 2028. In July, the UK Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights published a report examining how the UK's current Modern Slavery Act 2015 is being enforced. The committee was exploring if the Act prevents the use of forced labour in products that reach UK supply chains. And the committee made several recommendations to improve accountability for businesses and better align with the UK with other jurisdictions. So let's just flick back to the answer now to that final poll question. So what percentage of products advertised failed checks related to at least one of the Green Claim Code's 6 key principles? The answer was in fact A, 84%. So 62% did not properly comply with 2 or more of the rules. The report raises concerns about how the Competition and Markets Authority is enforcing the Green Claims Code obligations, and then if more needs to be done. And then 45% of you answered that one correctly, 50% of you went with 53%, and then just a handful went with the higher option of 95%.
Now, to look at the data across the consumer goods industry for Q3. And again, you can get more details on the recall data for the specific clothing, toys and electronics sectors in the full report. So in the UK and EU, consumer product recalls across all product categories declined by 16.8% between Q2 and Q3 of this year. They fell from 1,365 to 1,135 events. Despite this being the lowest quarterly total in over a year, consumer product recalls are firmly on track to reach record-breaking levels in 2025. Year to date, there have been 4,027 consumer product recalls. This is compared to 3,116 in the first 3 quarters of last year. Chemical hazards were the most frequently cited risk in Q3, associated with 501 recalls as a standalone hazard. When combined with other concerns, including environment, choking, and injuries, this figure increases to 538 events. Electric shock ranked second with 130 recalls. Choking as a standalone hazard was third with 109 events. Eau de toilette was the most frequently recalled consumer product, tied to 93 events. Perfume ranked second with 85 recalls in Q3, and lighting chains were third with 45 events.
Okay, so today's webinar offered the highlights of Q3 recall data and regulatory changes. You can get a more detailed look in our full European Product Safety and Recall Index. We also provide in-depth insights from our strategic partners that Chris mentioned at the start, at global law firms, insurance companies, and regulatory and safety organizations. These unbiased perspectives will be important as companies navigate comprehensive and sometimes overlapping regulations. As a follow-up to today's presentation, we will email you the full digital version of the Product Safety and Recall Index, so look out for that in your inbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks again to our partners at Gleiss Lutz, Simmons & Simmons, Taylor Wessing, Ashurst and Cooley. Really appreciate their valuable contributions to our latest edition. And of course, you can read the full article in the report later today. Before we do close, wanted to remind you that we also publish a product safety and recall index for the US market. So to download that copy, please scan the QR code there now, or click on the link. We've just posted it for a second time there in the chat. And then lastly, you can also download our latest Australian product safety and recall index report that looks at the regulatory developments and recall data for the first half of 2025. So again, to download your copy, scan that QR code on your screen, or find the latest link in the chat there. I did notice that we have had a few questions that have come in, mainly on the automotive sector, actually. So let's try and go back through some of those. So just wondering if there is any recall related to autonomous vehicles. So European regulators don't currently share this within their recall data. Instead, they typically categorize across vehicle type. So, for example, passenger cars, commercial vehicles, or motorbikes, for example. This is also true of electric vehicles. There's no overarching categorization of this, but of course we can kind of delve a bit deeper into it to try and identify those. So thank you for that question. Another one, do you have recall data split between EV and ICE vehicles? So again, unfortunately, we don't have the data split between those. It's not specified in European regulatory reports. We do have the option to kind of drill down into some of that data into a more granular level, but it's quite a lengthy task. So we try and keep the statistics that we share in the webinars and the reports just quite high level. And then finally, last question, how did you distinguish the recalls for safety versus out of specs? Does this mean that companies considered there was no safety risk, but the out of spec triggered the recall? That's a good question. I was actually at a conference recently and heard about a recall for a car that has, you know, what do you call it? Brain's gone a bit foggy. The video that records the back of your car as you're reversing, and it had a 2-second delay, so it was causing some vehicle owners to, bump the back of their car on a post or something because they were watching the video of the back of the car, and it was causing, collisions and accidents. So it wasn't necessarily a safety recall so much, but just an out of spec. So it does happen. We don't kind of report on it into so much detail. Again, we kind of monitor it from a slightly higher level, but we do have access to some of that data. So do reach out to us if you'd like some more detail on that. Okay. I think those are all of the questions that we had that we've managed to answer pretty much bang on 45 minutes there. So if you prefer to reach out to Hannah, Rachel, or myself directly, then please do reach out using some of the contacts on the screen in a moment. We'd be more than happy to schedule some more time to talk. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you found the session valuable, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.